Hey everyone, how's it going? Hobzoda here. For those of you who do watch me, you usually know that this channel I usually just use to, stream games and stuff. But I have talked about recently wanting to start doing movie reviews and movie related videos on the channel as well. And I thought I'd start off today with a ranking video, because recently on stream, one of you requested that I give my personal ranking of the live action Spider-Man movies. Which, makes sense. It's a fair question to ask since there already has been quite a few of them. I mean, just within the 2000s, we've had three different series of Spider-Man movies with three different actors, and there's been a total of 7 live-action films. So it's a fair question to ask. I am a big comic book fan, so it is interesting to know which ones I do think are the best and which ones I think are the worst. So that's how we're going to go by this list today. We're going to start from number 7 all the way down to number 1. We're going to do worst to best. And this is just my biased opinion of which movies that I think are worst to best. This isn't ranking the actors for each film necessarily, because I think each one of them were a good Spider-Man in their own way. Now, obviously, yes, I think there are those which I'll get into that were far better Spider-Mans than some, but that doesn't affect the ranking of the movies. So this is just ranking the movies here, which movies I think are worst to best. So we'll start off with number 7, which, oh boy, where to even start with this one? Spider-Man 3. This was the first one I saw in theater as a kid, because I remember when Spider-Man 2 came out. I was so excited, but my parents, they decided to go on a date and see it without me. When I stayed at home with my grandparents watching me, so I was like, you savages! No, but yeah, this one was the first one where they thought I was old enough where I actually was gonna get to go see this one in theater. Like, everyone in school was super excited for Spider-Man 3 to come out. Like, we were finally getting Venom, which, getting older and after watching this movie, I realized was probably a very bad thing. See, the only reason Venom was in this movie was because he was popular with the fans. He was a popular character, and so the studio interfered and told Sam Raimi, like, hey, we want you to put Venom in this movie somehow. So he forced them in there, and ultimately because of that, there was too much going on in this movie. There was too many villains, and there was this, as again, just too much stuff going on in this one film. Like, to me, who should have been the main villain, what should have been the main story of this film, was probably Harry, as the Green Goblin, because we only get to see that for 10 minutes of the film, 5 minutes at the beginning, and then 5 minutes at the end, where he shows up to save Peter. And yes, there will be spoilers in this video. But yeah, because they built up that story arc between him and Harry in Spider-Man 1 and 2, and that was the big cliffhanger at the end of number 2, was him finally finding the Green Goblin armor, and was going to go after Spider-Man now that he knows it's Peter Parker. But no, instead he's only in there for 5 minutes. Instead, we get this ridiculous story arc where he's has deja vu. He loses his memory, and then he has deja vu, starts getting his memory back, and then it turns into this soap opera where he has Mary Jane break up with Pete, even though we thought we just saw these relationship issues get resolved in the second one. Yeah, and then they just kind of shove Sandman in there, which I thought Sandman's origin story was great. It was beautifully done in this movie. The scene watching him become the Sandman is one of probably the most beautiful monster becoming scenes in superhero movie history. It's a little short film in itself. Watching his transformation and becoming the Sandman is so tragic. You see him watching him turning into sand, not knowing what he's become, and just you could see the tragedy just on his face. It's such a good scene, and you understand his character doing what he does for his daughter. But then they decide, this is why I say this movie has too much going on in it, but then they add in this storyline, another storyline that we already had resolved, that they decided to dive into further and bring back up again. Then they decide to shove Sandman into the whole Uncle Ben's murderer storyline. And they're like, it turns out this Sandman was really the one that shot your uncle. And you're like, are you serious? So yeah, now there's that, storyline is brought back up for no reason. There's too many unnecessary storylines that's shoved into this movie. Oh yeah, and speaking of which, Venom. Venom's in this movie as well now. And as I said, Venom was the part that everyone was like the most excited for. That I think probably ended up being one of the worst parts of this film. And the reason for that being is because, the number one part of this film that haunts people's nightmares is getting to see Peter Parker with the Venom symbiote become emo Parker. Like, turns full on emo, starts trying to put his hair down, become more edgier. And then, here's the thing. I get that, he's a super nerdy kid trying to act all bad now, so of course it's going to come off as cringy. But it is just too over the top cringy and laughable and just too painful to watch at times. For example, there's this one scene where he's in a jazz club with Gwen Stacy, who again is another unnecessary character that isn't even supposed to be there, doesn't even need to be in this film, just shoved in there. And he's there with this new date, Gwen Stacy, to try to make Mary Jane jealous, because that storyline has been brought back up for no reason. They're having relationship issues, and they've broken up for like the 500th time. And so he's trying to make her jealous by starting to do this dance on this table. And then there's this one part. He jumps off the chair. He takes off this jacket, and the gust of wind from him taking off his jacket burst up, and it flaunts his hair. And you're just like, oh my god, why? What am I watching? And I have a lot of problems with the character decisions in this movie too. Because even before Peter gets the Venom symbiote, before it attaches himself to him, he already is just acting like this arrogant dick for no reason. He doesn't even act like Peter Parker. Like, for example, during the beginning of this movie, Gwen Stacy is interviewing him as Spider-Man for Spider-Man Day. The whole city's celebrating Spider-Man. And so, to show off to the crowd, he decides to give Gwen Stacy the famous Spider-Man kiss that he did with Mary Jane in the first film, right in front of Mary Jane, who he's planning to propose to. Like, what? Why the hell would Peter even do that? It's just comes off as the most dick move ever. You're like, why? It makes no sense. And then speaking of character decisions making no sense, as more evidence of them trying to cram too much stuff into this one movie, there's too much stuff going on, so they had to find a way to redeem Harry in the same movie as well very quickly, because they already had too much stuff going on with the other villains in the film. So what they do to have Harry come help Peter out is that they do the character decision that makes the most nonsense, is they have his butler he tells him that he loved his father. So apparently this guy, he loves the family, right? So he's just now telling Harry that Peter is right, and that his dad did kill himself with his own glider, that it was his own blades that killed him, that he saw the wounds, he saw his father's dead body. And I'm like, dude, you've watched this man, you supposedly love this family, yet you've watched this man obsess over finding Spider-Man as his dad's killer, thinking that Spider-Man was his dad's killer, when you knew all along that Norman had killed himself with his own glider, and you're just now telling this to Harry? It's like, what the hell? It's just too much stuff was rushed and shoved in this one film, and because of that, there's just too much potential stuff that was built up, like the Harry storyline, that was just wasted because everything's just rushed and has too much stuff shoved into one movie. And so, unfortunately, because of that, that's why Spider-Man 3 is at the bottom of this list. Next up, though, to number 6, which, unfortunately, had a lot of the same problems. Number 6, The Amazing Spider-Man 2. And oh my god, you would think that they would have learned from the mistakes from Spider-Man 3, ruining the franchise by shoving too much stuff into one film, making Sam Raimi not even want to continue the franchise because studio involvement got involved and made him shove too much stuff in one movie. But no, they decided to ruin the franchise once again, the Amazing Spider-Man franchise this time, by, once again, shoving too much stuff into one movie. This movie had too much going on for it. And the Amazing Spider-Man series started off actually as a promising reboot, interesting reboot, and once they saw it, the first one was a success, they decided, oh my gosh, we gotta franchise this thing. So they spent too much time trying to build up to a Sinister Six movie and adding other stuff in for the future of the franchise into this one movie, instead of just focusing on the actual story of the movie itself. I felt like I was watching too much of a commercial for future stuff to come in the franchise than watching an actual movie at the time. Sorry about that dog's barking in the background, but yeah, overall the main problem with the movie is that it just felt too commercialized, and it was caught up too much in commercializing for the franchise, the future of the franchise, and worrying about the actual story that they had in front of them. And the actual story that they had in front of them was like one of the most iconic, tragic storylines like in comics. Was is like the death of Gwen Stacy. How she gets thrown off the bridge, or in this case the clock tower, by the Green Goblin. And Spider-Man accidentally kills her by trying to save her. And one of the reasons that storyline was so iconic in the comics is because it was after this build-up rivalry that had already been going on between Peter, Spider-Man, and the Green Goblin. But the Green Goblin is just rushed in at the end of this movie, which is a shame because again they tried to shove too much stuff into one movie. Again, same mistake that Spider-Man 3 made, because you also have the Green Goblin, and then you have, oh my gosh, Jamie Foxx as Electro, and then you have Paul Giamatti as Rhino. And both Jamie Foxx and Paul Giamatti are usually both great actors. But I don't know what they're doing with either of this movie. Paul Giamatti as Rhino is completely unnecessary. The movie doesn't change with him or without him there. And he has this ridiculous Russian, over-the-top Russian accent going on. So cartoony. And then you want to talk about cartoony superhero villains. Electro feels like all of Joel Schumacher's over-the-top Batman movie villain shoved into one person. Like, Jamie Foxx's Electro is literally the cliche comic book villain who's looks up and idolizes his hero, then feels betrayed by him. So he's like, oh, I hate him now. I must get revenge. He is literally Edward Nygma's Riddler, Jim Carrey's Riddler, in Batman Forever. That's literally his character in this movie. And then he makes all of the cheesy puns that Mr. Freeze makes in Batman and Robin, where he's like, "It's my birthday, time to blow out my candles," and you're just like, "Oh my god, why? Just why?" But yeah, there again, same mistake as Spider-Man 3 made. There's too much going on in one movie. All just because they're trying to build up to the Sinister Six, it's this only Spider-Man's second film. And, because they ran a rushed Green Goblin in there, it didn't have as much impact as it could have, for Gwen Stacy's death at the end of this film, which is a shame, because in the Amazing Spider-Man movies, Spider-Man and Gwen Stacy have really good chemistry in these movies, and there's definitely still an emotional impact there at the end, only because of Andrew Garfield's acting, during the scene, and because they did have good chemistry in the films. But there is enough emotional value there and build up to make the scene as impactful as it should have been in the comics, because the Green Goblin storyline was just too rushed in there and becoming the Green Goblin, which is a shame because it should have been built up more. Because Dan DeHaan and Andrew Garfield both had great chemistry earlier in the movie, as Peter Parker and Harry. But yeah, it was just too rushed too quickly. Could have been done better. But again, not bad as Spider-Man 3 though. Pretty close, but not as bad. Anyways, moving on to number 5, back to the Tobey Maguire films. Spider-Man 2002, the original Spider-Man movie. Now this film isn't necessarily that bad at all. There's just stuff that again could be done better in it. But the last two films we talked about, they had some bad aspects. The villains in those movies were handled pretty poorly, as I said. Could have been done much better with. The villain in this movie, though, Green Goblin, is actually pretty dang good. One of the most famous comic movies of all time is The Dark Knight, with Joker and Harvey Dent, who are both handled so well. And one of the most iconic lines from that movie with Two-Face as the villain is from Harvey Dent, saying that you either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain. And I feel like Dan DeHaan's Green Goblin already kind of touched on that iconic statement. Already kind of touched on the meaning of that in this Spider-Man movie, in the original Spider-Man movie. There's such a great powerful scene where he has Spider-Man captured on this roof, and he tells him, in spite of all you do for them, in spite of how much you care for them, eventually they'll hate you, which is so true. And you can kind of see where Green Goblin is coming from, since Norman himself got screwed out of his own business. So eventually, that's where he's coming from. That's what he's saying. Eventually they'll screw you. Eventually they'll hate you, no matter how much you do for them. And so it's pretty powerful. He was a pretty good villain in the film. Now, unfortunately, this film, a lot of people are going to defend it since it was an older movie. It was oh, Hobbs was the early 2000s, back 2002. So it's okay that they had really bad, cheesy, bad visual effects. Because Green Goblin's throwing weapons down, and the people are disintegrating out of nowhere. You see their skeletons. And it's so cartoony. Some of the effects are so bad. But no, the fact that it's an older movie in the early 2000s does not defend that. I mean, Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers came out in the same year, and that had groundbreaking visual effects, even today, and that was in the same year. So yeah, that could have been done a little bit better. And the only other thing I didn't like in this Spider-Man origin story movie that was really, again, good in the Amazing Spider-Man movies was the romantic chemistry. Like, I did not care for Kristen Dunst really at all as Mary Jane in this movie. Like, you didn't really care for there wasn't really much chemistry there, I thought. She was just kind of a Dunst character. So, yeah, there's that. But, wasn't too bad, though. Then on to number 4 on the list, a movie that I thought was actually a really surprisingly better done origin story for Spider-Man was the first Amazing Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man. One problem I had with Spider-Man 2002 that you can easily look past, that everyone always jokes about, was that it's a bunch of high schoolers that are all actors that are in their 30s that look like they're in their 30s, or are supposed to believe as high schoolers. Amazing Spider-Man, however, you can more believe, Andrew Garfield as a high schooler, and it actually feels like they're more in high school, which is good. And as I said, one thing that Spider-Man 2002 suffered from was there was like hardly no romantic chemistry. But the romantic chemistry between Gwen Stacy and Spider-Man is really good in these films, as I said. It carries it. And one thing about Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man is that he did a really good job playing the nerdy Peter Parker character, which is why you kind of look past him looking like he's 30. But he was too emotional. It wasn't as sarcastic, and as much of a sarcastic smartass like a teenager is supposed to be, like Spider-Man is in the comics. Andrew Garfield, I feel like for this movie, nailed that as Spider-Man. But at times he did look a bit too swagger for you to believe him as Peter Parker, though, being a nerd. He looked too over the top swagger to be believable as a nerd. But he was really good as Spider-Man. Like, I feel like in some ways he still is like the best Spider-Man. But Tom Holland, he's the best of both worlds, because he's both the nerdy Peter Parker and the sarcastic Spider-Man. But another thing I liked though about the Amazing Spider-Man is that even though he didn't look as nerdy as Tobey Maguire did, he still comes off. He's still like, they show how smart he is better in this film, I feel like. Because one cool thing that Tobey Maguire films try to do is they try to just make the web shooters an organic thing that automatically comes out of his hand because of the spider bite. But in this film, it actually shows how smart Peter is. It shows what he actually does in the comics is that he makes the web shooters himself, which I thought was really cool. And you actually get to see that in this film, and I think it's cool seeing Peter adjust to the powers when he first gets into this film too. It was a really good origin story, I thought, and I like seeing Dr. Connors as the Lizard finally, so that was handled well too. On to number 3 on the list, though. What do you want? Sorry, my dog's trying to play right now. What's this freaking ball? No. On to number 3 on the list. I just did number 3, didn't I? I just did number 3. Number 2. My bad. No, I did not do number 3. I just did number 4. Oh my gosh. Wow. Successful video. On to number 3 on the list. Spider-Man Homecoming. That's right. The other origin story movie. Okay, dog. The other origin story movie. This time with Tom Holland. Now, I said Tom Holland. He's like the best between both worlds because he was believable as a nerdy Peter Parker character and believable as a sarcastic wit Spider-Man character. And he actually looks like and feels like a high school kid. For the first time ever in these Spider-Man movies, you could actually believe that Tom Holland's in high school. This time. Now, one of the main complaints about this movie is that, it feels like Iron Man Jr. too much, though, and doesn't feel like Spider-Man enough. Which I get, but, since they were introducing Spider-Man into the MCU this late, I feel like Iron Man was a good way to do it, because even in the comics, Iron Man makes his suit for Civil War. And eventually we do get to see him in his own suit come to his own at the end of the movie, which is really cool, seeing when he fights, when he gets the suit taken away and has to fight Electro, discovering his powers for himself. Because I like that line, that Iron Man gives him, if you're nothing without the suit, then you don't deserve it. And we actually get to see him, start to discover his powers, use them on his own, and has to defeat Electro in that freaking homemade suit that he makes, which is really cool. And, the fighting up in the air with Vulture is, really good in the movie as well. Oh, and then Mary Jane is finally awesome in these movies, too. We don't get to see too much of her in this movie, which is good because it just focuses on the fact that it is an origin story, which is awesome. And freaking Michael Keaton was really good as Vulture, and there's so much good suspense in this movie. Even though it's not like a main romantic interest, it's just a girl he has a crush on, which makes sense in the first movie because, again, he's in high school. There's so much suspense there with it once you find out that it's like her father. That's Vulture, that's the villain. So they did a really good job there. Anyways, on to number 2 on my list. This dog. Spider-Man Far From Home. I freaking love this film. One of the reasons I love this film the most is that, as I said, I'm a huge comic fan as well. I'm a huge fan of the comics, and so Mysterio is one of my all-time favorite villains. And to finally see him on the big screen and get to use him was awesome. And it made the wait worth it. Getting to see what they can do with all the visual effects now, which is what you need for Mysterio's illusions and stuff. And all the sequences in this movie with Mysterio's illusions are just spectacular to watch, as they should be. And Jake Gyllenhaal just plays the role so well. Mysterio really is like the ultimate trickster, and you get to see him do that to Peter in this movie, and it's really well done. And then, as I said, Peter and MJ in this movie are way better than Peter and MJ chemistry-wise in the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, I thought. And this MJ isn't just a damsel in distress, finally. We get to see an MJ that defends her herself, which is also just refreshing to see and great, I thought. And Spider-Man really does even come to his own even more in this movie. He realizes he has to step out of Iron Man's shadow and becomes his own superhero, which is really awesome to see. I really like Far From Home, and getting to see one of the best Spider-Man villains finally come to screen is just a huge plus. On to number 1, though. As I said, the actor doesn't always... Just because Tobey Maguire wasn't the best Spider-Man doesn't mean that his movies weren't good. But yes. So, on to number 1. Spider-Man for the PS4, the video game. I'm just kidding. But, if that did count, this movie improves what makes its movies. Spider-Man 2 so great. Even more. You should really check it out if you haven't. But yeah, Spider-Man 2, definitely number 1 for me. It shows that Sam Raimi really knows his stuff, from the comics, because it takes one of the most pivotal comic story arcs for Peter Parker, for Spider-Man, the Spider-Man No More storyline, where Peter, we get to see him have that inner conflict with, not being able to focus on his real life and take care of his real life and having to take care of the city being Spider-Man at the same time. So he decides to ditch the suit because it's too much for him. He gets too stressed out by it. But then, because of that, we see him understand what Uncle Ben meant by with great power comes great responsibility, because he learns why he's responsible for this power, why the city needs Spider-Man. And so he decides to put on the suit again. This is a really cool character arc for him to finally understand why he needs to be Spider-Man. And so because of that, though, the conflict with him and Mary Jane in this movie actually makes sense. And Doc Ock is such a good villain, too. You can definitely see the conflict there, and there's some really cool action scenes with that. And just overall, storyline-wise, I think this really was, the best Spider-Man movie. And, again, the conflict between Mary Jane and Spider-Man in this movie makes sense, because, he has that conflict. He doesn't feel like he could be Spider-Man and take care of her at the same time. But yeah, those are my personal rankings of the 7 live-action Spider-Man films. If you have any disagreements, or thoughts, or agreements, or anything you'd like to discuss, love to discuss it. Thank y'all for watching. And if you want to see me do any more video content in the future, like movie reviews or stuff, just let me know. I'd love to keep this coming to y'all. Let me know what you think. And I'll see y'all later. Peace.